Hello, I'm Tricia Stringer, and I'm the director of Multiplying Hope, a trauma healing program that has been used all over the world. But today we want to talk a little bit about how trauma healing has been used in the United States effectively, and how we've even seen some of those groups multiply. Now, Multiplying Hope uses as its core curriculum a trauma healing program called New Hope. And New Hope is based on Bible storying. It's an oral approach to trauma healing. So I want to introduce you today to Tracy. Now, Tracy serves overseas, but before she went overseas, she worked in the US and she did several New Hope groups in the US. She saw many of those groups multiply even to the third generation. So I wanted to talk to Tracy a little bit today about the kinds of things she saw happening in her New Hope groups. And we hope that this is helpful to you. So I met Tracy about a year and a half ago. She was looking for a trauma healing program and COVID had just hit. So we had to cancel the training that we were going to do in person with Tracy and her group. But instead, we did a Zoom healing group together. And so, Tracy, could you tell us just a little bit about why you wanted the New Hope training in the first place and what were you hoping to gain from it?
So the group that we work with in Africa, they're all refugees and they had left their country in droves and were living as refugees in different countries. We were working in those refugee camps and they desperately needed some trauma healing, but we wanted something that they could carry forward that was simple enough, that was based on the Bible, but they need a manual and all kinds of things to carry forward.
So before you did New Hope, had you used Bible stories in any of the things you had done before?
So the thing that we had done is among one of the tribes that is known to be very, very illiterate, we had started a storying set. So I had that experience working with creating oral stories and teaching them how to do oral stories. We did an oral story set of Joseph. That was 9 stories. And then we did a Jesus story set also with that same group of people and tried to teach them how to take something and create an oral story.
So, what was the benefit of using stories, Bible stories, with these Americans in this first group? What did you see as the benefits of using storying?
I think one of the things that I saw was a shift. At first, everybody was some were frustrated at the number of times you have to tell the story. We've already told it. Why do we have to keep doing this? Very quickly, they became that changed and they actually enjoyed that part. And then as they were challenged every week to go out and share that story, they realized that the way they had done things before, they could not go out and share with friends, family, the checkout lady at the grocery store, because you can't whip out your Bible and say, well, in Mark 4 it says, but it's a lot easier to do that in story form. And they started using it not only for trauma healing, but in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different ways.
What were some of the ways that they were using those stories?
So they started using stories as an entry to grab people's attention and say, would you, this is a story from the Bible. Would you like to know more about Jesus? They used it to, if someone was explaining a hurt or something they were going through, they could say, you know, Jesus experienced that also. I know the story. Can I tell the story to you? And that made Jesus more accessible and more like the people they were talking to.
That's great. Okay, so it sounds like you had done a little bit of storying before you did the New Hope group, but not a huge amount. So how is this for you to facilitate a healing group completely orally? I know that we didn't use manuals within the group, so everything you did was oral, right? You were just telling the stories, going through the whole structure without looking at something. How is that for you to prepare for those sessions and then to lead sessions like that?
So it took more in preparation. I couldn't just show up with my Bible and read the verse. I actually had to prepare it and I had to practice it. Usually in the mirror out loud. And then usually with a timer, see how long it took. And then I would record it and listen to it to make sure I wasn't adding anything or subtracting anything that needed to be subtracted. All of that took extra time.
So how many people were in each group?
It varied. 5 was the least, 10 was the most, but smaller groups. Ones with smaller groups multiplied better. They actually went deeper with each other. They created more community with each other, and they were more likely to start their own groups.
Why do you think that was?
I think there's more interaction, and I think you could bring to the table, hey, this didn't work for me, or I tried this and this wasn't going well, and so they felt like they had support. I also feel like in a smaller group, I was more bold to challenge them to do things, and we had the time to encourage each other. So if you didn't share, you were encouraged weekly. Whereas if you have 10 people, somebody gets swept under the rug.
So what kinds of people were in your groups?
So it was a variety. I had, in that first group of 5, there was someone who heard about church planting once. There was someone who did church planting. And then there was a woman from my house group, and I'll never forget, she said, after she did the story, she told the story to somebody. She called me up and she said, I think I just discipled someone. I've always wanted to disciple someone, and I've never known how. And so there were a lot of people like that too. So missionaries, we had in this group, missionaries from Peru. We had one missionary from somewhere in the UAE. So they were really all over the world and all over the United States also.
So how did you see people's lives changed?
So what I saw was an increase in self-awareness, an increase in that it's okay to talk about those things. And the aha is that sharing a Bible story can be healing for you. When you share a Bible story and you actually share it, you live it in your mind because you're speaking it with your mouth, and that creates an opportunity for healing. And so what we found is that the healing would start during our group, but it would continue long after.
So can you give us some other examples of how you saw multiplication happen and how some different people went on to start their own groups and what happened with that?
So the church planter automatically started 3 groups, and those groups were made up of really different people also. And she and I talked about things we learned from the other groups. Sometimes I challenged people to start their own groups, and sometimes I didn't. And we were looking at what multiplied, what divided. And she was seeing also, if she didn't see people sharing the story, number 1, they didn't get their healing as deep. Number 2, they didn't start other groups. So we knew that sharing the story, or at least like one of the trauma activities, if they weren't doing that, they weren't getting what they needed. And so when she started doing that, it started more groups. So she started a healing group that started a healing group that started a healing group that started a healing group.
That's awesome. So can you kind of describe to me what happens in a healing group? What's the structure of a session? And what parts of that session do you think are most significant in the multiplication process?
Look back, you care for each other, you share what you did, you share how the week went. You also share what you said you were going to do and not do the week before. There's a question that says, if this story is true, how does it change the way you live your life this week? Well, did your life look different? That is a critical piece of multiplication. If they're not applying something in their life they don't get transformed, they are not going to care. They are not going to take it anywhere. That's just a standard thing. Then in the look up part, we look at a story, it's trauma healing. And then we take that story and we do an activity that is related to that story, which takes us deeper. So those two things together were important: sharing and knowing the story, doing the trauma healing activity. And often we would send a message in the middle of the week. Hey, how is that going? Hey, have you had any insights into anything? Accountability, again, is one of the things that made everything work. If they shared the story, things went well. If they shared the trauma healing activity, if they were using those tools that they were getting in each session with someone in their lives, there was extremely good chance that they would do the whole New Hope session with someone else.
So before you moved overseas, this is a recent move, right? So that means that you've been working with Americans in North America for many years. What would you say is different about using Bible stories than the things that you may have tried before? And what has that meant for you in terms of seeing the groups that you've started multiply?
So here's where I think we are in North America. We will meet around our pain way before we will meet about a Bible study. And so the thing that New Hope did is gave a purpose that may have been self-centered. But you know, we all come to Jesus self-centered, but put us in a position in the end to be other-centered. And so I think being able to tell those stories on the street, I can now tell so many more stories than I used to be able to tell. Off the cuff, in the moment, I know how to tell several stories. We just did we just did with the women henna, and this is the henna for the bleeding woman. And we taught them to tell the oral story of the bleeding woman and to go and tell other people. So it's kind of blossomed into the best way for others to go and tell.
How do you feel like Bible stories, even in a North American setting where we can all open up our Bibles, or many of us can open up our Bibles and read it? How does using Bible stories deepen our faith?
I think it's the more things you activate, that's a basic teacher thing, right? If you sit in a classroom and you just regurgitate, you don't learn at a very high level. If you sit and read a book, there's nothing that activates something in your brain to put any files anywhere necessarily. It's a low level of learning. When you have to learn a story well enough to tell it, you internalize that story. It moves it to an active learning rather than a passive learning. Active learning is when we put something in a file in our brain that we can pull out later. I think in today's world in North America, everyone is so busy and we have so much in our brain, but we don't have tools that we can just pull out in the moment.
Okay, so as someone who has worked in North America for many years and done a lot of different kinds of things, you're now speaking to a North American audience who might be wondering, why should I use Bible stories? And why should I use Bible stories in trauma healing? So, is there anything you want to add just at the end here? Anything else you want to share with this audience from your recent experience? You've only been using Bible stories in this way for the past year, right? So, what would you like to say to this audience who might be wondering, should I or shouldn't I? And what's the benefits of this? And what are the challenges? Is this worth it for me?
As far as Bible storying, even in a literate society, we are oral people. So in today's world, we speak things rather than focus on reading things. So an oral strategy actually speaks to who we are as people, even in the Western world. We may be able to read, but I know the younger generation, they read in sound bites and snippets. So if you can put it in a story, it's a bite. So I think it reaches our younger generation because it's a bite. It's a complete capsule. I also think New Hope is for this time. I just see this as I've been working on multiplying churches and trying to start churches that start healthy other churches for a lot of years. And what I found is that the New Hope provided the caring community foundation that can move to church. They're already caring for each other. They're already learning how to listen to each other, already learning to honor each other and to respect each other's journey. Everybody's not the same. And then you bring in the actual church part of it. They want to continue at the end. Even people that were in about 6 different places on these Zoom calls had a really hard time stopping meeting because they developed relationship. I think relationship with each other and relationship with God puts God in the position to show up in mighty ways. And that's what we need today. We need God to show up in mighty ways. We need a power encounter with a living God that's not like any other. And I think you get that when you learn a story or you hear a story.
Thank you, Tracy. That was great. And thank you for sharing with us. And so stay on the call if you want to keep talking to us, and we'll have a question and answer time. Thank you.